Okay, so this is a slab home and we have basically a plumber's box. A lot of times when the concrete guys go ahead to do their forming, they form just a square around the drain because most of the time the decisions on the shower pan are not made. So they just basically put a 12-inch by 12-inch area for this. So let's first just cut down the pipe, get rid of this wood framing, and then we're going to fill this in with concrete. Okay, so to fill this in, first off, you need to know what system you're installing. So if you're using a Wedi system, I just recommend getting something that will give you 5.5 inches around the actual drain location so that you can connect the pan. So that's typically what you need. This is a 6-inch cup link. What I'll be doing is just centering this directly around the pipe and then filling concrete all the way around this, and this would give me enough room around this pipe. So then when I connect my actual drain assembly, the one made by Wedi, I'll have enough room around that drain. So what I recommend using is just some rapid set, fast setting, thin set. This will allow this to set for a couple hours and then go ahead and put your shower pan in. So if not, you'd have to set the concrete, let it set overnight, and then do it. But you need to have structural concrete underneath the shower pan. You can't just use a mud bed, and definitely can't fill thin set this much. So what I do recommend though is if you're mixing concrete in a bucket, is to get one of these mud mixers. These things are really great because you can mix the concrete to a thicker consistency and not getting too watered down. So we'll go ahead and mix this. So I would say it's better to be a little too low than too high. You don't want this raising up. You can always add additional thin set to layer it up. So just make sure that the concrete doesn't come up above. But all you're doing is basically centering this pipe around the drain, and then that'll allow you to connect that drain nice and easily. So what we'll do once this sets up, we'll actually cut this PVC pipe around here. Okay, so it's been about 3 hours. So this is all nice and hard now. So what you want to do is just take your oscillating tool, cut off this pipe flush. So this is one area where Wedi is a lot easier, and that is just taking a jam saw and cutting it flush with the floor. So there's no having to figure out exactly where you need to be. It just goes straight flush with the floor. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and dry fit this. Hopefully, I don't need any adjustments cuts here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and then set this down. Well, first we'll put the drain assembly on here. So yeah, make sure you always use the Wedi sealant for this project. Okay, so then you just want to basically just get the drain assembly together. You want to get it around the hub on the inside of the drain. So as you can see, that's really well sealed there all the way around that flange. So this just comes with a couple of parts. You basically just have a rubber gasket and a slip ring. So you just want to take this, already drain, and just press that into that Wedi sealant. And then you take your rubber gasket, put that on, and then your little slip ring. This allows you to tighten it. And you're just going to be doing this hand tight. So one thing about connecting this drain is that you need to wait for at least a half an hour before you actually adhere it to the drain, because you need this Wedi sealant to completely dry before, you know, adhering the rubber gasket on it. Okay, so that's all nice and snug. And on the other side, we're just going to smear this out and just remove all that excess around this drain. So we're going to set this pan, but you just don't want to connect the actual drain assembly with the rubber gasket until after this stuff sets up for about 20 minutes to half an hour. It's going to take about that much longer to just do the entire system, so take your time on that. Okay, so we got the pan dimensions good, and we'll set this aside, and we're going to thin set our floor. So you just want to use a modified thin set, and you want to use a 1/4 by 1/4 inch square notch trowel. So the first step obviously is just to take a damp sponge, wipe down this subfloor, get rid of any debris, and this also helps eliminate that thin set from wicking dry really quickly from the concrete. So just take a damp sponge and wipe it down. And then you take your thin set and burn it into the substrate with the flat side of the trowel. Just the same as the Schluter pan, nothing different here. And then just do directional troweling. Okay. And you want to do that same thing on the back of the pan, burning it into the substrate. Okay, then the same thing, directional troweling in the same direction that you applied it on the floor. Make sure this is well bonded. Try to collapse those ridges. Okay, so we'll get our back panel on here first. So that's basically 48. We'll make it 47 3/4. Okay, so one of the big differences between Wedi and Kerdi board is that this foam core is waterproof. So I could even nick the front of this. If I had to straighten out some tile and I used a grinder and I nick the top of this, not a big deal. Just as long as it doesn't go all the way through, you know, just as long as your knife doesn't go all the way through and penetrate a hole through there, you're fine. So that is one really, really great benefit about Wedi, especially if you have other contractors working in the same space. You know, this is definitely going to ensure that, you know, whatever happens to this, that you're going to most likely be fine. Any tool that's dropped, whatever, it's going to take a lot for this to be punctured. So, and the other thing is, it's much more rigid. It's a very rigid board compared to Kerdi board. So those are probably the biggest differences between it, is the fact that it has that waterproof foam core. Okay, so we set our board into place. It's not a bad idea just to mark the bottom of this board so that you have a reference point to look at when you set this into place, because this is really the most critical part of this system, and that's making sure that this board is well sealed with sealant in that rabbet joint. So this will give us an indication that, you know, once I put the sealant, I'm going to probably see this line, but at least I know the board is really well placed into that rabbet joint. So we're just going to take our gun here and just apply a large bead of sealant in that entire groove. So we'll go ahead and take our board. And really make sure that goes into that rapid joint. And then you can reference your line, making sure that that's well sealed in there. And if you see it oozing out, that's what you want to see. Okay, so then the first row of screws, you don't want to be below 12 inches. So make sure you measure up and go 12 inches on these studs, because the idea is that you don't want to be pinching anything below here and pushing this board out of that rabbet joint. So keep your first row of screws 12 inches off the floor. Just pinching them to get recessed in between the board here. And every 12 inches after that. And then you can take these two and pinch one together. Save yourself a washer and a screw there. Okay, so this is another big difference between the two systems. You gotta put some sealant in between each sheet. So put a large bead right on top of this board. Okay, and then we'll just put this right on top of that, and this will seal in between those two boards. Again, it's nice to see that oozing out. That means you got it well sealed. Okay, so we just, you want to cut a 4.5 inch hole for the center of this valve. Okay, make sure your rabbet joint is all clear. And we're going to fill that up with sealant. And then you want to go down the side of the corner. Okay, so you want to make sure you see that oozing up in the bottom there. Okay, so we'll cut out their niche. So I would say probably one of the biggest reasons that Wedi is easier is because of the sealant application. And when it comes to a niche, I mean, there really isn't anything much easier. It's much quicker than the Schluter system when it comes to that, because all you're really doing is just putting sealant in all the corners and there's no additional buildup really. So when you put this, I'm just doing this, you could do it either way, but I always like to have my sill down first. Obviously making sure that it pitches into the shower, because a lot of water is going to hit here and you want it to drain out. But yeah, I'm just going to put some sealant where it meets here at the bottom. And then I'm going to just basically adhere it to the drywall in the back here. Okay, and then I'll put my top board in first. on this drywall seam, they do make a Wedi seam tape that I'm going to go all the way down. Now, as you can see, my drywall comes into my shower here a little bit, but this seam tape will bring me all the way down to the outside of this area. So I want to put this on first before I go putting my curb in. So we can just apply thin set with this, kind of the same as the Curdy membrane, just with a 1/8 by 1/8 inch square notch trowel. And you just want to use a modified thin set for this. We have a valve seal, so very similar to the Schluter system. So there's a big fat end here and a skinny end. The big end goes into the wall. So I'm actually a little bit off on my area here. We also have a pipe seal. Now we can go ahead and put our curb in. Now that we got the waterproofing all the way outside of this. So 47 and 1/8. Okay, so you want to put some sealant in your rabbet joint. Okay, so that's not too bad. Just want to make sure it's fairly level. Now fine, for the final sealant, basically you're just going to go over all the corners. I highly recommend you get one of these corner trowels. This really makes it nice and flat in the corners, especially if you're doing a niche. So all you really need is just like a 3-inch putty knife, and then just a corner niche or a corner trowel. I ran out of sealant. It's always a good idea to buy a whole bunch of extra tubes. So I'm gonna have to do it tomorrow morning, but it really shouldn't slow us down. I should be able to, because really only takes a couple hours for this stuff to dry, and then you can flood test it and go ahead and do it. But for the most part, it's a really fast installation as long as you just don't run out of material. So we'll finish it up tomorrow. Finally getting back to the finishing this off, had to get a couple more tubes. So it is nice, you can just do this whenever you just do it a couple hours before you're ready for a flood test. So let's go ahead and finish off our sealant. Okay, so we're gonna connect our Wedi drain. So there's two different ways. There's there's just two different sides of this. So there's a flat side and then there's a beveled side. So the beveled side needs to be pointing up. So you just slide this over top of your drain. So make sure that pushes on there. Then you just take your locking nut. Okay, that's all nice and snug. We'll put our plug in and we'll do a flood test. So you just want to measure down to your drain, get a consistent mark. So I'm just go like 3 3/8 on that. And then you really want to just pay attention to any air bubbles. If you see any, if you see air bubbles, that means there's something not right. Typically where you see the air bubbles though are like right around your drain. So if your plug isn't completely tightened in there, it can be leaking right there. But yeah, just pay attention to this, keep this overnight, and then you can remove the water and feel confident that it's waterproof. But if you just make sure you reference the same location, go 3 3/8, and hopefully nothing drops.